The classroom was noisy until the teacher clapped his hands, silencing the chatter. His tone carried that sharpness the kids had grown used to, especially the black boy sitting quietly at the back of the room. For weeks, the child had been his target. Subtle remarks, mocking grins, every mistake highlighted, louder than anyone else's. The boy rarely raised his hand. He kept to himself, writing carefully in a notebook that was always neat, answers clear even if his voice never spoke them aloud. That day, the teacher smirked as his eyes landed on him. "All right," he said, his voice just a little too loud. "Let's make things interesting. Who wants to try a problem they won't be able to solve?" His eyes narrowed directly at the boy. The room shifted nervously. Everyone knew what was coming. He scribbled a massive equation on the board, symbols and numbers stretching across the green surface. Complex enough that even the stronger students felt uneasy looking at it. The teacher turned with a grin. "This one's impossible. Unless, of course, our genius in the back wants to give it a shot." Laughter rippled through the class, though not all of it was mean. Most of the kids laughed nervously, unsure what else to do. The boy swallowed hard, pushed his chair back, and stood slowly. He didn't look angry. His expression was steady, almost calm. The teacher leaned back against his desk, arms folded, fully convinced this was about to be a spectacle. "Well, don't take all day," he jeered. The boy walked to the board, his eyes scanning every line with careful precision. For a moment, the class buzzed quietly, then fell silent as they watched him pick up the chalk. His hand moved, not hesitantly, but with rhythm, breaking down the equation faster than the teacher expected. Term after term, he simplified, aligned, drew arrows, crossed out, rewrote. The teacher's smirk began to falter. The numbers that once looked overwhelming now shrank into smaller, manageable steps. The boy paused only briefly, lips pressing together as he checked the sequence in his head, then continued with confidence. By the time the equation was simplified to its last line, the class leaned forward collectively, breath held. He wrote the answer, stepped back, and placed the chalk quietly on the ledge. The room erupted before the teacher could even speak. Students clapped, some shouted in disbelief. Others laughed not at him, but in awe, cheering. The teacher's face flushed red, eyes wide. He checked the board, frantically retracing the math, and realized every single step was correct. No errors, no stumbles, just precision. It was he himself who looked foolish now, caught mocking a child who had just proven himself in front of everyone. For the first time that year, the boy smiled faintly as he turned toward his classmates. The power in the room had shifted completely. The teacher tried to recover, muttering about not wasting time and moving on, but it was pointless. The teacher's forced grin lingered on his face as he picked up a marker and tapped the board, pretending to remain in control. "Well, anyone can get lucky once," he muttered, his voice tight, his eyes darting to the rest of the class as though begging for their agreement. A few students exchanged uncomfortable glances, but no one laughed this time. The mood had shifted. They had all seen what had just happened, and deep down they knew it wasn't luck. The boy quietly walked back to his desk, his shoulders steady, his expression calm. He didn't gloat, didn't smile wide, didn't throw looks back at the teacher. He simply took his seat, opened his notebook, and wrote down the final line of his own work, mirroring the answer that was still on the board. The other kids couldn't take their eyes off him. Whispers began to ripple through the rows. "Did you see how fast he did that?" one girl whispered. "Even the teacher couldn't keep up." A boy in the corner nodded. He knew exactly what he was doing. Like he'd practiced it for years. The teacher's ears burned red as the murmurs grew. He slammed the marker on the desk to get their attention. "Quiet!" he barked. "This isn't a circus." But the silence that followed wasn't the silence of respect anymore. It was the silence of doubt, of students realizing the authority they took for granted might not know as much as he claimed. A shift had happened, and the teacher could feel it strangling his control of the room. He cleared his throat and scrambled for another problem, one more complicated than the last, adding layers that twisted across the board. "Let's see if anyone else here can handle this," he said, his voice dripping sarcasm, but not daring to call on the boy again. He pointed to another student, a nervous one in the front row, but the girl's cheeks flushed as she stared hopelessly at the problem. No one could answer. The teacher's act began to crumble. Moments earlier, he thought humiliating one boy would consolidate his power. Instead, he had exposed himself. The class felt it. They no longer stared at the boy like he was strange or different. They stared with admiration and even a little pride. For the first time, their gazes carried respect instead of suppressed laughter. The boy noticed but didn't say anything. His focus never wavered, his pencil moving slowly across his page, solving problems alone while the tension rippled around him. The teacher turned back to the board, his chest tight. For years, he had controlled the room by talking down and feeding off silence. But today, his authority cracked. Today, silence belonged to the boy, and the regret gnawed deeper into him than he would ever admit out loud. The classroom remained tense, the marker squeaking, faintly as the teacher tried to fill the board with a new problem, one more massive and twisted than the others. But every symmetry of his lines, every number he wrote, couldn't mask the fact that his hands were shaking. The students saw it. They saw how his smirk from earlier had vanished, how he was stalling, how his voice carried a nervous edge each time he spoke. "This one," he announced, clearing his throat, "is beyond anything you'll see in exams. A real challenge. Let's see who's brave enough to try." His tone aimed for confidence but fell flat. The kids didn't answer. They looked from the endless equation on the board to the boy at the back. No one said a word, but their gazes asked the same question. Could he do it again? The boy felt their eyes, though he didn't move right away. He kept writing calmly in his notebook, listening to the heavy silence swirl around him. Finally, the girl to his right whispered gently, "You can do it, can't you?" It wasn't mocking. It was hope. For the first time, the boy looked up willingly. His eyes moved to the board, then to the teacher, who had crossed his arms tight across his chest, the facade of control slipping with each second. Without speaking, the boy stood. There was no laughter this time, only the shuffle of his shoes against the floor as he walked forward, chalk squealing slightly when he picked it up. He scanned the massive expression for a few moments, then started breaking it down. His movements were steady, sure, and strangely graceful, like he was pulling order out of chaos. Step by step, the sprawling mess shrank into a sequence the class could finally see. When he paused, someone from the third row leaned forward, whispering, "He's got it!" The teacher's jaw grew tight, his throat bobbing with unease. He wanted to interject, to throw another interruption. But even he knew every line was precise. Every choice made sense. By the time the final answer emerged, clear and correct, the classroom couldn't hold itself. Applause erupted. Desks rattled as kids clapped, some even whistling, pride swelling in a way they hadn't known they carried. The boy stepped back from the board, setting the chalk down softly, his face still calm but shadowed by the smallest hint of a smile. Across the room, the teacher's fingers clenched at his desk. The attempt to undermine him had not only failed, it had flipped. The one he thought he could humiliate was now the one his students looked up to most. Regret hung heavy, though he didn't dare speak it. For the first time since he'd walked into this school, the balance of the classroom wasn't in his hands anymore. It was in the boys'. The noise of applause finally settled, but the energy in the room didn't fade. It was different now, heavier with meaning. The boy quietly returned to his seat, not triumphant, not parading himself, just calm. His classmates turned in their chairs to look at him with respect instead of mockery. Whispers followed, admiring, astonished, and genuine. The teacher, red creeping into his face, struggled to regain control. He slammed his hand on the desk and barked, "Enough! Settle down!" But his words didn't carry weight anymore. The room went quiet, not from fear, but because no one needed him to tell them what they had already seen. Authority had shifted. He tried to brush it off with a forced laugh. "A good memory, nothing more. Don't think solving one problem makes you special." But the words hung in the air, brittle and insincere. His students weren't buying it. Some looked at him with disbelief, others with disappointment. They had watched a moment of honesty and brilliance. Pretending it didn't matter only made the teacher look smaller. The boy sat still, pencil in his hand, as if nothing extraordinary had just happened. But deep inside, he felt something he hadn't in a long time: pride. For weeks he had endured ridicule, being treated as different, less capable. Now, without shouting, without revenge, he had proved them wrong in the clearest way possible. His silence had spoken louder than any insult thrown at him. When the bell finally rang, students crowded him with questions. How did you do it so fast? Where'd you learn all that? He only shrugged, keeping his answers few. It wasn't about boasting or turning the tables on anyone, and it was about knowing his worth and letting his work speak for itself. The teacher packed up quickly, keeping his eyes down. He muttered something about moving to the next chapter tomorrow, but nobody cared. Eyes were still on the boy. That day, the lesson wasn't found in the pages of their textbooks. It was written on the chalkboard, in lines of precise calculation that had silenced arrogance and lifted someone who deserved to be seen. As the room emptied, one classmate lingered by his side, quietly telling him, "You're more than what he made you out to be. Don't forget that." The boy nodded once, slipping his notebook into his bag. For the first time, he walked out of class not feeling small, but standing taller. And behind him, the teacher sat alone, the sting of his own regret echoing louder than the cheers had moments before.